People think a life changes slowly, that it breaks over years, not seconds. They're wrong. My life shattered in half a second the moment I saw a red laser dot bloom on a 6-year-old girl's chest. I didn't scream. I didn't think. I moved. The bullet tore through my shoulder instead of her heart, and as I hit the pavement, bleeding and dizzy, one terrifying thought cut through the pain. That shot wasn't random, because the girl I saved wasn't just a student. She was the daughter of a man powerful enough to make people disappear. And now, the people who wanted her dead knew my face, knew my name, knew I existed. By nightfall, I had armed guards outside my door, a Mafia boss's number in my phone, and a warning whispered so calmly it chilled me more than the gunshot ever could. You stepped in front of my world today, and once you're seen, you can never be invisible again. This is the story of what happens after the bullet. Everyone later said it was an act of instinct, a teacher protecting her student, a body moving faster than thought. What no one knew, what Natalie Pierce herself would only understand much later, was that the bullet that changed her life had already chosen her long before that afternoon. 2 years earlier, Natalie had been a name whispered with promise in ballet circles. Her lines were clean, her timing precise, her future almost painfully bright. She was supposed to leave the studio and step onto bigger stages, brighter lights, a life built on discipline and applause. Then, on a rain-darkened street, a car came out of nowhere. No witnesses, no clear license plate, just twisted metal, shattered bone, and a verdict delivered quietly by doctors who wouldn't meet her eyes. She would walk again. She would teach. But she would never dance the way she once had. So Natalie learned how to disappear. She became the kind of woman people looked through instead of at. A ballet instructor at an elite academy, respected but unnoticed, dependable but forgettable. She arrived early, left late, paid her rent on time, and kept her dreams folded away where they couldn't hurt her anymore. She told herself this was enough, that existing without wanting was safer than hoping and losing again. That afternoon began like all the others. Autumn sunlight spilled across the academy steps. Parents clustered near black cars, checking phones, calling out names. Children ran ahead, laughter bouncing off the stone buildings. Natalie stood near the gate, counting students out of habit, her injured shoulder aching dully with the change in weather. Sophia's small hand slipped into hers. Sophia was 6. Quiet. Observant in a way that felt older than her years. She listened more than she spoke. And when she danced, she didn't chase perfection, she absorbed it. Natalie had noticed that from the first lesson. Some children learned steps. Sophia learned space. You did very well today, Natalie said, squeezing her hand gently. Sophia smiled, soft and shy. Uncle Enzo said I could practice turns at home. Natalie was about to respond when something caught her eye. A reflection. A glint of light where it didn't belong. Her gaze shifted instinctively, scanning the row of parked cars, the windows across the street. Then she saw it. A small red dot. Perfectly round. Perfectly still. It hovered on Sophia's chest, just below her collarbone. For half a second, Natalie's mind refused to make sense of it. The world narrowed, sharpened, every sound dropping away. She had danced for most of her life. She had trained her body to respond to danger, to imbalance, to the slightest deviation in rhythm. Her body moved before fear could catch up. Natalie pulled Sophia toward her, twisting as she stepped forward, her shoulder turning instinctively to shield the child. The crack of the rifle split the air, loud and final, and pain exploded through Natalie's body like fire ripping through silk. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Her vision blurred at the edges, white and pulsing, but her arms stayed locked around Sophia. She curled over the girl, pressing Sophia's face into her chest, one hand cradling the back of her head as if this were just another rehearsal, another correction. Stay down, Natalie gasped. Don't move! Don't look! Screams erupted around them. Someone shouted. Car doors slammed. Feet pounded against pavement. Natalie tasted blood, sharp and metallic, as the pain radiated from her shoulder down her arm in violent waves. It felt alive, consuming. But she forced herself to stay conscious, scanning the rooftop across the street where she had seen the flash. Nothing. Just blue sky and brick and the indifferent calm of the city. The shooter was gone. Sophia was shaking against her, sobbing into Natalie's blouse. "Miss Natalie," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're bleeding." "I know," Natalie murmured, though her words came out thin and uneven. She tried to smile. "It failed. But you're okay. That's what matters." The academy doors burst open. Adults rushed forward, voices overlapping, panic spilling in every direction. Someone called for an ambulance. Someone else tried to pull Natalie up. But she cried out, her grip tightening around Sophia until hands withdrew again. As the sirens grew closer, Natalie felt the world tilt. Darkness pressed in from the corners of her vision, heavy and inevitable. The last thing she registered was Sophia's fingers clutching hers, small and desperate, and the terrible clarity of a thought she couldn't escape. Someone had aimed a rifle at a 6-year-old girl, and that kind of violence was never random. When Natalie woke, the smell of antiseptic filled her lungs. Machines beeped softly beside her bed. Her shoulder burned, distant but insistent, wrapped in bandages and pain she couldn't fully feel yet. A nurse spoke calmly, telling her she was lucky, that the bullet had missed anything vital. "You saved her life," the woman said, almost reverent. "Sophia is physically unharmed." Natalie closed her eyes, relief crashing through her harder than the pain. "Good," she whispered. She thought that would be the end of it. A statement to the police, a few days of rest, a quiet return to her invisible life. She was wrong. The air in the room shifted before she heard the door open. It was subtle, like the pressure change before a storm. 2 men entered first, dressed too well, moving with a precision that had nothing to do with medicine. One remained near the door. The other scanned the room with a single, assessing glance. Then he stepped inside. He was tall, dark-haired, his suit immaculate, his expression carved from restraint. He didn't rush, He didn't need to. His presence filled the space effortlessly, bending it around him. When his eyes met Natalie's, something in her chest tightened. Not fear exactly, but recognition of danger dressed as control. "Natalie Pierce," he said, his voice low, measured. Not a question. She swallowed. "Yes, I am Vincenzo Raldi." He paused, watching her carefully. "Sophia is my daughter." The words landed with quiet force. Natalie stared at him. Fragments of rumors clicking into place: wealth, power, a name that existed in boardrooms and darker conversations alike. Her heart began to race, not from pain this time, but from understanding. He moved closer to the bed, just enough to make his intention clear. "Because of you, my child is alive," he said. "But because of what you saw, because of what you did, you are no longer safe." Natalie opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand, silencing her without touching her. "The people who ordered that shot now know you exist," Vincenzo continued calmly. "And once someone like me notices you, so do my enemies." He placed a sleek phone on the bedside table. "That device is yours. My number is programmed in. There are men outside your door. When you are discharged, they will take you home." "I don't want this," Natalie said hoarsely. "I don't want protection. I don't want to be involved." Vincenzo studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "You became involved the moment you moved," he replied. "You stepped in front of my world. And once you are seen..." He leaned closer, his voice dropping just enough to make it personal. "You can never be invisible again." As he turned to leave, the weight of his words settled over Natalie, like a sentence she didn't remember agreeing to. She lay there, staring at the phone, at the guarded doorway, at the life she had lost and the one closing in around her. The bullet hadn't missed. It had simply chosen a different kind of target. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Natalie was discharged the following afternoon with her right arm secured in a sling, a prescription she barely registered, and a warning she could not forget. The bullet had missed anything vital, the doctors said, as if luck were something that could be measured and bottled. Natalie knew better. Luck had nothing to do with stepping in front of a rifle. She stepped out of the hospital doors and into a reality that no longer belonged to her. The black car waited at the curb, engine running, windows tinted too dark to see inside. 2 men stood nearby, dressed like businessmen, moving like something else entirely. One of them opened the rear door the moment he saw her. "Miss Pierce," he said politely, not warmly. "We're here to take you home." "I can take a cab," Natalie replied, though even to her own ears, the protest sounded thin. The man's expression didn't change. "No, ma'am, you can't." The finality in his voice made further argument pointless. Natalie slid into the car, her pulse loud in her ears as the door shut behind her with a heavy, decisive click. The city moved past the windows, familiar streets suddenly foreign, as if she were watching someone else's life from a distance. Her apartment building looked smaller than she remembered, narrow, exposed. The men exchanged a glance when they saw it, and Natalie felt a flicker of defensiveness she couldn't explain. This place had held her together when everything else fell apart. It had been enough. It wasn't anymore. They escorted her inside, one man lingering by the door, another checking the hallway before allowing her to unlock it. Once inside, the older one spoke again. "There will be someone outside at all times. Do not leave alone. If you need anything, you call first." "For how long?" Natalie asked quietly. "Until the threat is gone." When they left, the silence pressed in hard. Natalie stood in the center of her living room, the familiar space now feeling staged, temporary. She had barely set her bag down when a knock echoed through the apartment. A package sat on the floor. No label, no delivery slip, just a plain brown box. Something cold settled in her stomach. Natalie didn't touch it. She backed away and called the number she'd been given, hands trembling despite her effort to stay calm. "Don't open it." The voice on the other end snapped. "We're on our way." They arrived in minutes. The box was cleared with efficient movements, gloves snapping on, weapons discreetly drawn. Natalie watched from the doorway as the lid was lifted. Photographs spilled out. Her, leaving the hospital. Her, standing by her window late at night. Her, teaching at the academy weeks before the shooting. Dozens of images, taken from different angles, different days. Proof that someone had been watching her long before she ever saw the red dot. At the bottom lay a single note. "You should have stayed invisible." Natalie's knees nearly gave out. He came that night. Vincenzo didn't knock. He didn't need to. The room seemed to shift the moment he stepped inside, his presence commanding attention without asking for it. His eyes went first to Natalie, scanning her quickly, cataloging her condition, her fear, then to the photographs spread across the table. His jaw tightened. "They were watching you before the attack," he said. It wasn't a question. Natalie folded her arms around herself. "Why, that," Vincenzo replied calmly, "is what we're going to find out." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. But there was something coiled beneath his restraint that made the air feel dangerous. He issued orders with quiet precision, his men moving instantly, disappearing back into the night. "You can't stay here," he said, turning back to her. "This is my home," Natalie said, though even she heard the lie in it. "It was," Vincenzo corrected. "Now it's a liability." She met his gaze, anger sparking through the fear. "You don't get to decide that." His eyes softened just enough to surprise her. "I don't make decisions to control you," he said. "I make them to keep my daughter alive, and you are connected to her now." The truth of that settled heavily between them. An hour later, Natalie was standing at the gates of his estate, staring at walls too high and lights too bright to feel real. The house beyond them wasn't a house at all. It was a fortress disguised as elegance. Sophia ran to her the moment she stepped inside, arms wrapping tightly around Natalie's waist, her small body shaking. "I thought you were gone," the child whispered. Natalie knelt carefully, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and hugged her back. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Vincenzo watched them from a distance, something unreadable crossing his face. When Sophia was finally coaxed toward bed, he led Natalie through quiet corridors to the guest wing. "This is yours," he said, "as long as you need it." The room was warm, understated, prepared with a care that unsettled her. Bulletproof glass. A discreet panic button. Thoughtfulness disguised as security. "You didn't ask if I wanted this," Natalie said quietly. "No," Vincenzo agreed. Because wanting has nothing to do with survival. She turned to him then, really looked at him. You said they'll come after me. They will, he said without hesitation. You saw too much. You mattered at the wrong moment. The word lingered. Mattered. No one had used it about her in a very long time. I need you to understand something. Vincenzo continued. I don't make promises lightly. When I protect someone, I do it completely. Natalie's heart pounded. And what does that make me for the first time since she'd met him? Vincenzo hesitated. Just a fraction. It makes you under my protection, he said finally. And in my world, that is not temporary. He left her alone then, the door closing softly behind him. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion crashing over her, mind racing despite it. That morning, she had been a teacher worried about rent and an aching shoulder. Now she was living behind gates, guarded by strangers, tied to a man whose power frightened her as much as it steadied her. Outside, footsteps shifted as guards took their posts. Natalie lay back, staring at the ceiling, one thought looping through her mind with relentless clarity. She had spent 2 years learning how to disappear. And in one afternoon, she had become impossible to ignore. Natalie woke before dawn to the quiet hum of a house that never truly slept. The estate breathed around her soft footsteps beyond the walls. A low murmur of voices carried through corridors designed to absorb sound. She lay still for a moment, listening, orienting herself, reminding her body that the pain in her shoulder was real and that the room was not a dream. She rose slowly, careful with the sling, and crossed to the window. Beyond the bulletproof glass, the grounds unfolded in precise geometry, trimmed hedges, gravel paths, lights placed at measured intervals. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was accidental. It should have felt safe. Instead, it felt watched. By the time she reached the kitchen, coffee already brewed. Sophia was there, legs tucked beneath her on a chair too big for her frame. The child looked up and smiled, relief flickering through her features, as if Natalie's presence were proof that yesterday hadn't taken something else away. Good morning, Miss Natalie, Sophia said. Uncle Enzo said you'd be here. I am, Natalie replied, and meant more than the words suggested. They spent the morning together in the small studio at the South Wing Gentle Exercises. Careful corrections, movements adapted to Natalie's injury. Sophia mirrored everything with intense focus, absorbing rhythm and space as naturally as breathing. Watching her, Natalie felt a tug she didn't name, a protectiveness that had nothing to do with obligation. Vincenzo observed from the doorway for a time, silent, his attention sharp. When Sophia was led away for lunch, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I want your eyes on something, he said. He spread papers across a table, schedules, maps, notes neatly annotated. Natalie recognized the academy's layout instantly, traced the familiar lines without thinking. Vincenzo watched her closely, as if measuring something beyond her reactions. What stands out, he asked. Natalie frowned. The answer came too quickly to ignore. Consistency. She said, too much of it. She pointed to highlighted times. Private lessons every Thursday. The same studio, the same entrance. Pick up at predictable minutes. Children need routine, she continued, choosing her words carefully. But routine creates patterns. Patterns create vulnerability. Vincenzo went very still. Natalie moved to the floor plan, her finger tracing windows. Studio C faces the street, large panes, clear sightlines. Anyone watching from across the way would know exactly when she'd be there. She looked up. The shooting happened on a Thursday. Yes, Vincenzo said quietly. She didn't soften the truth. Your security varied routes, not timing. To someone patient, that's a map. The silence stretched. When Vincenzo spoke again, it was with a new note, respect edged with something like concern. You see movement the way my men see threats. I see exposure, Natalie replied. I spent years learning where bodies are most vulnerable in space. Orders were issued immediately, schedules changed, locations randomized, windows treated. Natalie watched the machine respond to her insight and felt a strange disorientation. She had spent 2 years being careful not to matter. Now, her noticing altered outcomes. That afternoon, Madame Karen arrived. She swept in with practiced warmth. Concern shaped into elegance. Her eyes lingered on the room, The guards. The gates beyond the glass. "Darling," she said to Natalie, touching her good shoulder lightly. "We've been so worried." "I'm recovering," Natalie replied. "I'm relieved," Karen said, and smiled. Sophia belongs back at the academy. Structure, normalcy. This isolation. She let the implication hang, then turned toward Vincenzo. Surely temporary. Vincenzo's expression didn't change. For now, Karen's gaze returned to Natalie. "You have influence," she said softly. "Use it for the child's sake. Bring her home." After she left, the house felt tighter, the air sharper. Natalie stood by the window, replaying the visit, the gentle pressure beneath the kindness. Something didn't fit. The concern had been too specific, the timing too convenient. Messages began arriving that evening, from teachers, from parents, from acquaintances who hadn't spoken to her in years. Questions edged with rumor, assumptions wrapped as sympathy. Natalie didn't answer. At dinner, Sophia chattered between them, filling the space with stories and certainty. Vincenzo listened more than he spoke, his attention flicking off into Natalie, as if reassessing a familiar equation with new variables. Later, in the hallway outside Sophia's room, Vincenzo paused. "She's attached to you." Natalie nodded. "She needs stability." "So do you," he said. She met his gaze, surprised by the softness there. "I don't need protection to exist." "No," he agreed, "but you shouldn't have to disappear to survive." The words settled deep, unwelcome, and true. That night, Natalie slept lightly, dreams fractured by movement and angles and red light. When she woke, her phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number, a photograph, her apartment window, taken from across the street. The timestamp was from that night. Her breath caught. She rose, crossed to the door, opened it to find Vincenzo already there, expression dark with recognition. "They're closer," he said. She handed him the phone. He studied the image, jaw tightening. "They're mapping you," he added, "learning your habits." "Then they're wasting their time," Natalie said quietly. "I don't have any—" Vincenzo looked at her for a long moment. That's not true anymore. She didn't deny it. The realization pressed in, heavy and irreversible. She was not a shadow passing unnoticed through other people's lives. She was a variable now seen, calculated, contested. Natalie closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "If they're watching," she said, "then we change the pattern before they finish drawing it." A pause, then, slow and deliberate, Vincenzo nodded. In the quiet that followed, Natalie understood something with startling clarity. The danger hadn't pulled her into this world. Her choice to see to act had. And the shadows, once noticed, never stayed still. The change began quietly, the way dangerous things often did. Natalie did not wake up one morning suddenly fearless or certain of her place in Vincenzo Raldi's world. She woke with the same dull ache in her shoulder, the same cautious breath before movement, the same awareness of guards beyond the walls. What shifted was subtler. She stopped shrinking inside herself. After the message with the photograph of her apartment window, Vincenzo altered the household rhythm without announcement. Guards rotated, routes changed. Rooms once considered safe were abandoned for others that felt less obvious. Natalie noticed the adjustments immediately, not because she was told, but because the house moved differently. Patterns broke. Silence rearranged itself. She began to walk the estate the way she once walked a stage, not as a guest, but as someone learning its geometry. She traced corridors, measured distances with her steps, stood in doorways and windows and imagined sightlines. The injury forced her to move slowly, but slowness sharpened her awareness. She noticed how sound traveled, where light pooled too generously, where a body would hesitate before turning. Vincenzo watched her from a distance at first. He did not interrupt. He did not question. When she finally spoke, it was because the words had arranged themselves with uncomfortable clarity. "The south wing is exposed at dusk," she said one evening, pointing to the way the sun angled low and bright through the trees. "Anyone patient could learn the timing. You should close the blinds earlier." He studied the view, then nodded once. Orders followed. Later, She pointed out the flaw in the perimeter near the gravel drive. Not a gap, but a predictability. Your men paused there, she said. Not long. Long enough to be counted. That time. Vincenzo looked at her instead of the drive. Something in his expression shifted. Subtle and unmistakable. Respect, edged with recalibration. You think like someone who understands rhythm. He said, I think like someone who learned what happens when rhythm breaks, Natalie replied. Their conversations became more frequent, more focused, less about protection, more about anticipation. Natalie found herself included in briefings she hadn't been invited to before. Maps spread across tables as Vincenzo asked her not what she felt, but what she saw. The distinction mattered. It placed her beside him, not beneath his authority. The intimacy of that partnership unsettled her more than the danger ever had. Sophia sensed the change too. She grew more confident in the studio, her movements bolder, her laughter louder. She began seeking Natalie's approval, not with timid glances, but with expectation, as if the world made sense when Natalie was there to see it. Watching the child flourish stirred something warm and fragile in Natalie's chest, a reminder of what had been taken from her and what remained. One afternoon, as Natalie corrected Sophia's posture with gentle precision, she felt Vincenzo's presence behind her, not looming, observing. When Sophia was dismissed, he didn't leave. She listens to you, he said. She trusts me, Natalie replied. He considered that. She hasn't trusted anyone since her parents died. The admission was quiet, unguarded. Natalie turned to face him, seeing the man behind the control for the first time not as a force, but as a wound carefully armored. She chose her next words with care. She needs someone who doesn't see her as something to protect or leverage, Natalie said. Just someone who sees her. Vincenzo's gaze held hers. And you? The question landed softly, but it struck deep. Natalie inhaled. I'm learning. That evening, Madame Karen returned. This time, Natalie noticed everything. The way Karen's eyes tracked the guards before settling on her, the practiced warmth that sharpened when Vincenzo entered the room, the faint irritation when Sophia was mentioned not as a student, but as a child who belonged elsewhere. Karen spoke of routine, of stability, of the Academy's readiness to welcome them back. Her words were smooth, persuasive, threaded with concern. Natalie listened and heard the undercurrent, control disguised as care. When Karen left, Natalie stood by the window long after the car disappeared down the drive. Her reflection stared back at her, unfamiliar, not broken, not invisible, just alert. She wants things to return to how they were, Natalie said when Vincenzo joined her. Yes, he agreed. That's why it feels wrong. Natalie continued. Nothing about this should go back. Vincenzo studied her profile. You're certain? I'm observant, she corrected. And she doesn't like unpredictability. That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying Karen's words, the way they pressed without force. She remembered the timing of her own accident, the sudden job offer, the gratitude she'd been trained to feel. A thread pulled loose in her mind, unraveling more than she was ready to face. In the early hours, she rose and padded down the corridor, stopping outside Vincenzo's office. Light spilled from beneath the door. She hesitated, then knocked. He looked up as she entered, concern flickering before he masked it. What is it? Natalie stepped inside, heart steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. I think the danger didn't start with the sniper. The silence that followed was absolute. Explain, Vincenzo said. My accident, Natalie continued carefully. The timing, the job, the way Karen speaks about what she gave me. I thought I was lucky. Now I think I was convenient. Vincenzo leaned back, his gaze never leaving her face. When he spoke, his voice was low, controlled. If you're right, this isn't about opportunists reacting to Sophia. It's about planning, Natalie said. And if someone planned that far ahead once, they won't stop now. Vincenzo rose slowly, the movement measured. Then we stop them first. Natalie nodded, a strange calm settling over her. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. She had spent years believing her usefulness ended with her injury. Now, standing in the quiet center of danger, she understood the truth. She had not lost her instincts. She had sharpened them. As Vincenzo moved past her to issue orders, Natalie remained where she was, the weight of her realization steady and undeniable. She was no longer reacting to a world that hurt her. She was anticipating it. And in a world built on control and silence, the most dangerous person was no longer the one with the most power. It was the woman who noticed where it cracked. Natalie did not confront the truth all at once. It came to her in fragments, sharp and unsettling, like memories that refused to stay buried once disturbed. After the night she spoke to Vincenzo about her accident, she found herself watching the world differently, not searching for threats, but for intent. The academy returned to her thoughts more often than she liked. It happened in small ways. A familiar ache when she corrected Sophia's posture, remembering the mirrored studios where she had once trained as a student herself. A flicker of resentment she quickly buried whenever Madame Karen's voice echoed in her memory, soft and approving, heavy with implication. "You owe me." Natalie had never heard the words spoken aloud, yet they had shaped her life all the same. 2 mornings later, a message arrived on Natalie's phone. "Karen, I hope you're healing well. My dear, we miss you at the academy. Sophia especially needs her teacher." The words were warm, almost maternal. Natalie stared at the screen for a long moment before locking it and setting the phone aside. Her pulse had quickened not with relief, but with unease. She didn't tell Vincenzo right away, not because she wanted to protect Karen, but because she wanted to be certain of what she felt. Certainty mattered. It was the difference between instinct and accusation. That afternoon, Karen arrived unannounced. Natalie was in the studio with Sophia when the door opened and the familiar scent of expensive perfume slipped into the room. Karen stood there, impeccably dressed, concern etched into her expression like a well-practiced role. "Darling," she said softly, "I couldn't stay away." Sophia brightened immediately. Madame Karen Natalie felt it then, the shift. The subtle reclaiming of space, of influence. Karen knelt to Sophia's level, praising her progress, promising visits, invoking the academy as if it were home itself. "You belong there," Karen said gently. "With your friends, with your routine." Natalie intervened before she could stop herself. "Sophia is safe here." Karen rose slowly, her gaze turning to Natalie. "Of course," she said. "For now." Then, lowering her voice. "But isolation isn't healing. Children need normalcy." So do broken dancers, Natalie thought, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Later, in the sitting room, Karen turned her attention fully to Natalie. "I've always looked out for you," she said, resting a hand on Natalie's uninjured shoulder. When no one else would take a chance, the touch lingered a fraction too long. "I gave you purpose," Karen continued. "Stability, a place to belong when your world collapsed." Natalie met her gaze, calm and steady. "You gave me a job." Karen's smile tightened, just enough to reveal the edge beneath. "I gave you a life." The words rang with a truth Natalie could no longer ignore. Gratitude had been the currency of her survival, carefully cultivated, quietly enforced. Karen had never demanded loyalty outright. She had built it brick by brick, using Natalie's loss as mortar. That night, Natalie told Vincenzo everything. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable as she spoke of the messages, the visit, the feeling of being guided back into a familiar cage. "When someone reminds you what they've done for you," he said when she finished, "they're rarely asking for thanks." "What are they asking for?" Natalie asked quietly. "Control." The answer settled between them with chilling clarity. Vincenzo's people began digging deeper: financial records, communications, timelines. Natalie watched the process unfold with a strange detachment, as if she were observing someone else's past being dissected piece by piece. Each discovery made her stomach turn, not because it shocked her, but because it explained too much. Her accident had occurred days before an audition that would have taken her out of the city. Karen's job offer had arrived almost immediately. The academy had benefited from Natalie's presence, not just as a teacher, but as access to talent, to families, to routines. Sophia had been the most valuable piece yet. The truth arrived late one evening in the form of grainy footage displayed across Vincenzo's office screens. Natalie stood beside him as they watched Karen meet with a man Natalie didn't recognize but instinctively distrusted. An envelope exchanged hands. A nod. A departure timed too precisely to be coincidence. "Who is he?" Natalie asked. "Dmitry Vulov," Vincenzo replied. "Antonov family." The name landed like a blow. "They were planning this," Natalie whispered, "long before the shooting." "Yes," Vincenzo said. "And they underestimated you." Natalie didn't feel flattered. She felt hollow. When the weight of it became too much, she retreated to the studio, the only place where her body still made sense. She moved slowly, carefully, the way she taught Sophia, adjusting, compensating, finding balance where it no longer came naturally. Vincenzo found her there, standing in the dim light, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "She used me," Natalie said without turning. "Broke me so I'd be grateful. So I wouldn't ask questions." Vincenzo stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. "She saw something in you," he said. "And instead of honoring it, she exploited it." Natalie laughed softly, without humor. "I thought I survived that accident." "You did," Vincenzo said. "But survival isn't freedom." She finally turned to face him. "I don't want you to handle this alone." His eyes searched hers. "This isn't your war." "It became mine when she decided my life was a resource," Natalie replied. "I won't disappear again." The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Then Vincenzo nodded. Once, slow and deliberate. "Then we face her together." In that moment, Natalie felt something shift not around her, but within her. The fear was still there, the danger still very real. But beneath it, something steadier had taken root. She was no longer bound by gratitude that tasted like debt. She was no longer the woman who mistook survival for safety. And the person who had once framed herself as Natalie's savior was about to learn what happened when the invisible refused to stay silent. The truth did not announce itself with drama. It surfaced methodically, like a tide pulling back to reveal what had been hidden beneath calm water. Natalie watched it happen from the edges, present but no longer passive, her instincts sharpened by weeks of seeing how danger shaped itself through routine and trust. Vincenzo's office became a place of quiet reckoning. Screens glowed late into the night with financial trails and surveillance timestamps, each detail stripped of sentiment and laid bare. Natalie stood beside him as the picture assembled itself, not as an accusation, but as an anatomy of intent. Karen's patterns were unmistakable once viewed without nostalgia, deposits that aligned with Academy events. Messages sent after schedule changes, meetings arranged where discretion was assumed rather than ensured. The most damning footage arrived just after midnight, grainy, angled poorly, yet clear enough. Karen exiting the academy through the back entrance, a black sedan rolling to a stop, a window lowering, an envelope exchanged. No hesitation, no fear, only efficiency. Natalie felt the room tilt, not because she doubted it, but because confirmation had weight. It pressed against the chest, altered breath, forced a recalibration of memory. She knew exactly when Sophia would be outside, Natalie said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Which door? Which minute?" "Yes," Vincenzo replied. "She sold certainty." The phrase lingered. Certainty was what killed children. Certainty was what had broken Natalie 2 years earlier, when a car appeared at precisely the wrong moment and disappeared before anyone could be held accountable. She sat down slowly, the chair cool against her legs. "My accident," she said. "It wasn't random." "No," Vincenzo agreed. "It was preparation." The words landed without cruelty, but they cut all the same. Natalie closed her eyes, letting the memories surface without resistance. The rain-slicked street, the impact, the offer that followed too quickly to be coincidence. Karen's voice at her hospital bedside, warm with concern and opportunity. "I'll take care of you," she had said. "You won't have to struggle." Natalie opened her eyes. "She needed me grateful," she said, broken enough not to leave, useful enough to notice nothing. Vincenzo did not deny it. He leaned forward, hands braced on the desk. She underestimated the cost of that kind of control. The investigation moved faster after that. Karen's accounts revealed more than greed. They revealed habit. Information had been her currency for years, traded quietly, insulated by the Academy's reputation and the silence of families who valued discretion over accountability. Sophia had not been the first child placed at risk, only the most valuable. Natalie felt something cold and focused settle over her. How many others, she asked. Enough, Vincenzo said. Too many. He issued instructions that night that shifted the board irrevocably. Karen would be confronted, but not on her terms. No negotiation, no half measures. Natalie listened as plans took shape, her presence neither ornamental nor incidental. Vincenzo asked her what Karen would expect, how she would attempt to regain control. She'll appeal to debt, Natalie said without hesitation. To loyalty, to what she believes she gave me. And if that fails, she'll threaten exposure. Natalie replied. She thinks fear is leverage. Vincenzo's gaze sharpened. Is it? Natalie considered the question carefully. She thought of the life she'd lived before the accident, the one she'd been told was over. She thought of Sophia, asleep down the hall, breathing evenly, trusting the adults around her to tell the truth. No, she said, not anymore. The Academy was quiet when they arrived the next evening, its elegance dimmed by shadows and the absence of children. Natalie moved through the familiar corridors with a clarity that surprised her. Every step echoed with memory, yet none of it held power over her now. She was not returning as a supplicant or a survivor. She was returning as a witness. Karen's office light was on. She looked up as they entered, surprise flickering briefly before composure reasserted itself. Natalie, she said, smiling. I was hoping you'd come to your senses. Natalie didn't sit. She didn't raise her voice. You planned it, she said. The schedules, the exposure, my accident. Karen's smile thinned. I gave you a life, she replied. You would have wasted yourself otherwise. The words slid off Natalie without finding purchase. You used me. Karen's gaze shifted, sharpening as she assessed the room. The men stationed discreetly beyond the door. This doesn't have to become unpleasant, she said. We can protect each other. Vincenzo stepped forward then, his presence unmissable. You sold my daughter's safety, he said quietly. There is no protection left for you. Karen's eyes flicked back to Natalie. He'll destroy you, she warned. You think this world rewards honesty? Natalie met her gaze, unflinching. I think it punishes predators. The silence that followed was absolute. Karen studied Natalie as if seeing her for the first time, calculation replacing confidence. You're not the woman I recruited, she said slowly. No, Natalie agreed. I'm the one who survived you. The confession came not with tears, but with negotiation. Karen outlined her leverage with clinical detachment, listing names, accounts, families who would prefer the truth buried. Natalie listened, then spoke when the words mattered most. Make the call, she said. Expose everything. Karen hesitated. For the first time, fear slipped through the cracks. Vincenzo did not interrupt. He watched Natalie with something like approval, something like pride. In that moment, the balance shifted decisively. Karen's power had depended on silence, and the belief that no one would choose exposure over safety. Natalie had chosen otherwise. They left the Academy with documents, recordings, and a promise extracted under duress. Outside, the night air felt sharp and clean. Natalie inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the present. She had not been saved by uncovering the truth. She had been freed by refusing to carry it quietly. And in the quiet that followed, Natalie understood that some truths, once spoken, could not be contained again. The fallout began before dawn. Natalie woke to movement in the house that felt sharper than before, voices clipped, footsteps purposeful, the low murmur of phones vibrating against wood. She sat up slowly, the ache in her shoulder a familiar anchor, and waited. When Vincenzo appeared at her door, he didn't soften the truth. They know. He said. Karen talked. Natalie didn't ask how. Confessions, once pried loose, had a way of traveling faster than intent. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, steadying herself. Then they'll come. Yes. He watched her carefully, as if gauging whether fear would fracture her resolve. It didn't. Something steadier had taken its place, an acceptance that visibility carried consequence. And consequence demanded choice. Security tightened, windows sealed, routes erased and rewritten. Sophia was moved to the interior rooms. Her lessons paused, her questions answered with careful gentleness. Natalie stayed with her, reading stories, teaching quiet games that didn't require space or noise. The child sensed the tension, but trusted the adults to hold it. By midday, the first message arrived. A number Natalie didn't recognize. No greeting, no pretense. "You've complicated things." She handed the phone to Vincenzo. He read it once and set it aside. "They're testing you." "Then they don't know me," Natalie replied. The second message came an hour later, accompanied by a photograph taken from a distance Natalie knew too well. The South Gate. The path she walked with Sophia 2 days earlier, before it had been closed. Natalie exhaled slowly. "They're drawing a boundary. They're inviting a negotiation," Vincenzo said. "One they believe favors them." He gathered his men and left shortly after, the promise unspoken but understood. Natalie watched from the window until the cars disappeared beyond the trees. The house settled into a tense quiet, as if holding its breath. She didn't wait long before the third message arrived. "Come alone? 1 hour." The address followed. Natalie stared at the screen, pulse steady despite the heat climbing her chest. She knew what Vincenzo would say. She also knew what she would do. When he returned, she met him in the hall. "I'm going," she said. "No," he replied without hesitation. "They won't talk to you," Natalie continued calmly. "They want leverage. They think I am it." "You are not a bargaining chip," Vincenzo said, his voice controlled but tight. "I'm a witness," Natalie corrected. "And I'm the only one they think they can scare." The silence stretched. Vincenzo's gaze searched her face, weighing risk against inevitability. At last, he nodded once, sharply. "You won't be alone. I won't be seen," Natalie countered. They compromised the way people did when neither would bend fully. Natalie would go. Vincenzo would be near enough to intervene, far enough not to be detected. Trust, stretched thin but unbroken. The meeting place was an unfinished structure on the edge of the city, concrete exposed to the elements, light filtering in through gaps where walls would one day stand. Natalie walked in alone, her steps measured, her senses attuned to movement and echo. A man emerged from the shadows, not Dmitry Vulov, but someone lower, more disposable. He smiled like he expected gratitude. "You made trouble," he said. Natalie met his gaze. "You aimed at a child." "She wasn't hit," he replied, dismissive. "That wasn't the point. That's where you're wrong," Natalie said quietly. He laughed. "You think you've won because you spoke up? Because a man like Raldi stands behind you?" Natalie took a step closer, her voice steady. "I think you're here because you're afraid of what happens if I don't keep speaking." The smile faltered. "Just enough." He leaned in. "We can make this go away. Your name, your accident, everything that broke you, we can fix it." Natalie felt the old temptation flicker relief masquerading as mercy. She let it pass. "I don't want it fixed," she said. "I want it known." His expression hardened. "You're choosing pain." "No," Natalie replied. "I'm choosing consequence." The sound of movement echoed faintly, signals passed, positions shifting. The man's gaze darted, calculating. "You think exposure protects you," he said. "It doesn't. It makes you visible." Natalie smiled, small and unwavering. "That's the point." The meeting ended without violence, without agreement. Natalie left as she arrived, alone in appearance, supported by a perimeter she didn't need to see to trust. When Vincenzo met her minutes later, his relief was brief, swallowed by urgency. "They'll strike," he said, "not to negotiate." "They already tried," Natalie replied. "This time, they'll fail." The attack came at dusk. It wasn't subtle. Vehicles breached the outer perimeter, gunfire cracking through the air, alarms shattering the calm. Natalie was with Sophia when it began, her body moving on instinct, guiding the child toward the safe room with practiced efficiency. It's a game, Natalie told her, keeping her voice light. Remember the rules. Sophia nodded, brave despite the fear trembling beneath her composure. They sealed the door, steel sliding into place. The world outside reduced to muffled sound and vibration. Natalie sat with Sophia on the bench, arms wrapped around her, counting breaths. Time stretched, elastic and uncertain. The noise peaked, then receded, then surged again. Natalie didn't look at the cameras. She didn't need to. She trusted the pattern of response she had helped design. When the knocks came 3, pause. 2, Natalie rose and opened the door. Vincenzo stood there, blood on his sleeve, eyes sharp with exhaustion and relief. He knelt in front of Sophia, checking her quickly, then pulled her into his arms. Only then did he look at Natalie. It's done, he said. They won't come back. Later. As the house returned to something like stillness, Natalie stood beside him in the corridor. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving clarity in its wake. They tried to make me small. She said, invisible. Vincenzo's gaze softened. And you refused. She nodded. There's a cost. Yes, he agreed. But there's also an end. Natalie looked down the hall toward Sophia's room, then back at the man who had trusted her when it mattered. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She had chosen to be seen, and in doing so, she had changed the shape of the world around her. Morning arrived without ceremony, pale light seeping through curtains that had not been opened in days. The house felt different after the attack, not quieter, but heavier, as if it were learning how to breathe again. Natalie woke with Sophia curled against her side on the narrow bed in the interior room. The child's hand fisted in the fabric of Natalie's shirt. Unwilling to let go, even in sleep. Natalie lay still, listening. No alarms, no hurried footsteps, only the distant murmur of voices and the steady rhythm of a place returning to order. Relief came slowly, cautious and incomplete. Sophia stirred and blinked up at her. Is it over? Natalie brushed hair from the child's face. Yes, she said, confident enough now to let the words stand. You're safe. Sophia studied her for a moment, then nodded, accepting the answer the way children did when they trusted the source. She slid out of bed and padded toward the door, already looking for her uncle. Vincenzo was in the corridor, jacket discarded, shirt darkened with dried blood that wasn't all his own. He crouched to Sophia's level immediately, checking her with gentle efficiency before pulling her into his arms. The tightness in his posture eased only when she clung back, solid and alive. Natalie watched them, a strange ache blooming in her chest. This quiet aftermath was more intimate than any declaration. It was what remained when fear receded and love was left standing. The hours that followed blurred into controlled activity. Cleanup teams arrived, reports were exchanged, names were spoken and erased. Natalie remained with Sophia, anchoring the child in routine as best she could breakfast at the small table. A story read aloud, simple stretches that let the body release tension without demanding too much. By afternoon, exhaustion settled in. Natalie stood at the window of the guest wing, watching the grounds being reset, evidence of violence scrubbed away until only memory remained. Vincenzo joined her, close enough that she felt the heat of him without needing to turn. You should rest, he said. So should you. He huffed softly, a sound that might have been a laugh in another life. Later, they stood in silence, the shared space between them charged with everything they hadn't said during the chaos. Natalie broke it first. Karen won't stop, she said. If she's still alive. Vincenzo's jaw tightened. She won't be a problem much longer. Natalie turned to face him fully. You can't erase this by force alone. His gaze met hers, sharp but attentive. What are you asking? I'm asking to finish it cleanly, Natalie replied. No shadows, no unfinished threats. He studied her for a long moment, recalculating. That means exposure. Yes. And consequences, he added. I know. The choice hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. Vincenzo exhaled slowly. Then we do it your way. The confrontation happened that night. Karen did not look surprised when they arrived at the academy. She looked tired, her elegance dimmed by strain, but her eyes still sharp with calculation. She greeted Natalie as if nothing had changed, as if they were alone in the room and time had simply bent around inconvenience. "You always were perceptive," Karen said. "I wondered how long it would take." Natalie didn't sit. "You tried to have a child killed." Karen's mouth tightened. "I tried to send a message." Natalie felt the old anger rise, clean and focused. "You destroyed lives for leverage." Karen shrugged lightly. "That's the world you stumbled into." "No," Natalie replied. "It's the one you dragged me into." Vincenzo remained silent, a presence that needed no introduction. Karen's gaze flicked to him, assessing, then returned to Natalie. "You think he'll protect you from what comes next?" "I think I don't need protection from the truth," Natalie said. "Only from you." Karen's composure cracked then, just enough to reveal fear. "You expose me, and others burn with me. Families with children. People who will make you disappear." Natalie stepped closer, voice steady. "I already disappeared once. It didn't save anyone." The standoff ended not with threats, but with surrender. Karen signed what she was told to sign. Accounts, properties, confessions recorded with a voice that shook despite her effort to control it. When it was done, she looked at Natalie with something like disbelief. "You'd ruin everything," she said. Natalie met her gaze. "You already did." Karen was gone by morning. The days that followed unfolded with a strange calm. Arrests made quietly, alliances severed, names removed from ledgers and replaced with silence. The academy closed, then reopened under new stewardship, its halls emptied of secrets at last. Natalie watched the transformation with measured distance. She didn't feel victorious. She felt resolved. One evening, as the house settled into something like peace, Vincenzo found her in the studio, standing barefoot on the polished floor, testing her balance. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching without intrusion. "You didn't dance," he said softly. "I didn't stop moving," Natalie replied. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "You changed everything." She shook her head. "I refuse to let it stay broken." They stood facing each other, the space between them filled with unspoken understanding. Vincenzo reached out, stopping just short of touching her hand. "What happens now?" he asked. Natalie considered the question, felt its weight and possibility. "Now," she said, "we decide what remains." He nodded, accepting the uncertainty as easily as he accepted command. For the first time since she'd known him, his power felt like a choice rather than a fact. Natalie looked around the studio at the mirrors. The light, the quiet promise of movement unburdened by fear. The world hadn't become safe, but it had become honest. And that, she realized, was enough to begin again. The house learned how to be quiet again, not the tense silence of waiting, but the softer kind that followed Storm's room settling, air loosening its grip, footsteps no longer counting threats. Natalie noticed it first in the mornings. Sunlight reached farther across the floors. Doors stayed open. Voices carried without caution. The guards were still there, always would be. But their presence had shifted from barrier to background. Sophia felt it too. She laughed more easily now, laughter that came without checking faces for permission. She returned to the studio with a lightness that surprised even Natalie, her movements fluid, confident, as if the fear that once tightened her shoulders had been unknotted. Watching her, Natalie felt a quiet pride that wasn't possessive or fearful. It was steady, earned. The academy reopened under new management, its corridors stripped of old shadows. Natalie visited once, not to reclaim anything, but to close a door properly. She walked the halls without flinching, her steps unhurried, her gaze clear. Memory no longer dictated her pace. That evening, Vincenzo waited for her on the terrace. He had removed his jacket, sleeves rolled back, the posture of a man who had stopped bracing for impact. The city lights glimmered beyond the estate, distant and indifferent. Natalie joined him at the railing, the space between them familiar now, no longer charged with urgency, but possibility. "You didn't stay long," he said. "I didn't need to," she replied. "It's not mine anymore." He nodded, accepting that without comment. "And what is Natalie considered the question?" Her eyes tracing the horizon. "What I choose?" The words felt deliberate, unafraid. They stood together as dusk deepened, conversation unspooling in fragments rather than declarations. They spoke of Sophia's progress, of the foundation being formed in her mother's name, of the future framed not as conquest or escape, but continuity. The simplicity of it felt radical. Later, as the house quieted, Natalie found Vincenzo in his office. The room lit only by a desk lamp. Papers lay untouched. He wasn't working. He was waiting. "I don't want to assume," he said when she entered, "about anything." Natalie leaned against the doorframe, studying him. The man before her was still powerful, still dangerous in ways she understood now without fear. But he was also patient, restrained in a way that had nothing to do with control. "I don't want to be protected from living," she said. Vincenzo met her gaze. "I wouldn't ask you to be. I won't disappear again," she continued. "Not for safety, not for comfort." His voice was quiet. "I wouldn't want you to." The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but weighted. Natalie crossed the room slowly, each step measured, intentional. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel his presence, not so close that choice dissolved. "What are you offering?" she asked. Vincenzo considered her carefully. Not shelter, not obligation. He paused. "Partnership." The word landed with unexpected warmth. She nodded once. "Then this is what I offer." Her voice didn't waver. Honesty, independence, staying because I want to, not because I'm needed. A corner of his mouth lifted, something like relief crossing his features. That's more than enough. The first touch came without urgency, his hand brushing hers. A question rather than a claim. Natalie answered by letting her fingers curl lightly around his, grounding the moment in choice. When he leaned in, she met him halfway. The kiss was unhurried, careful in its beginning, deepening only when certainty replaced restraint. It carried no desperation, no need to convince. It was the quiet acknowledgement of two people who had survived different battles and chosen to stand in the same place afterward. When they parted, Natalie rested her forehead briefly against his, the intimacy unspoken but complete. "This doesn't fix everything," she said softly. "No," Vincenzo agreed. "But it's real." Sophia's voice drifted down the hall moments later, sleep-soft and curious. Natalie smiled and pulled back, the moment adjusting without breaking. "She's going to ask questions," Natalie said. Vincenzo smiled faintly. "She always does." They found Sophia tucked beneath her blankets, eyes bright despite the late hour. She looked between them, perceptive as ever. "Are you staying?" she asked Natalie, not with fear, but with hope. Natalie knelt beside the bed, smoothing the child's hair. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm staying." Sophia beamed, content with the answer. "Good." As the light dimmed and the door closed, Natalie lingered in the hallway, the house breathing evenly around them. Vincenzo stood beside her, close but not pressing, the space between them no longer measured by caution. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. Natalie looked up at him, her expression calm, resolved. "I know." The truth of that settled like an anchor. She had chosen this him, this place, this life not out of fear or debt, but clarity. The world had not become simple. It had become honest. And honesty, Natalie realized, was the most hopeful beginning she could imagine. 3 months later, Natalie stood in the center of the studio and listened to the sound of children breathing. It was a quiet thing, almost unnoticeable unless you were trained to hear it, the collective rhythm of small bodies learning how to exist in space. The mirrors reflected a dozen young dancers warming up, stretching with concentration rather than fear. Sunlight poured through tall windows that had been deliberately frosted just enough to protect without dimming the day. The room smelled faintly of rosin and clean wood and possibility. This place had a different name now. It carried Juliana's Sophia's mother, etched discreetly into a plaque near the entrance. Not as a memorial soaked in grief, but as a promise. The foundation was small, carefully structured, transparent in ways the old academy had never been. Scholarships were built in. Safeguards were written into policy instead of whispered after hours. Teachers were protected. Children were never currency. Natalie hadn't planned to become its director. The role had arrived quietly, the way the most important things often did, offered without pressure and accepted without fear. She had learned the difference between being given something and being trusted with it. "Miss Natalie." Sophia's voice rang out, bright and certain. "Watch this." Natalie turned just in time to see the girl launch into a clean turn, balanced and precise, landing with a grin that needed no correction. Applause followed, soft, encouraging. "Earned." "Well done," Natalie said, and meant more than technique. From the observation chair near the wall, Vincenzo watched without interrupting. He had learned how to sit still in this room, how to be present without commanding attention. The power he carried didn't disappear here, it simply had no reason to speak first. When Natalie glanced his way, he met her eyes with a look that held no urgency, only pride. Class ended without ceremony. Children gathered their bags, laughter trailing behind them as they left with guardians who smiled easily now. Trust no longer a fragile thing. When the studio emptied, Natalie remained where she was, hands resting lightly on the bar, grounding herself in the moment. "You stayed late again," Vincenzo said, approaching. "So did you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Occupational hazard." They walked the grounds together as evening settled, the estate no longer a fortress, but a place that breathed with intention. Security still existed, nothing this valuable ever went unguarded, but it no longer dictated how the day unfolded. The threat that had once shaped every decision had been dismantled piece by piece, not erased, but rendered powerless. At dinner, Sophia talked nonstop about a book she'd read, about a friend she'd made, about how she wanted to choreograph something of her own someday. Vincenzo listened the way he always did now, with patience, with curiosity, with the quiet awe of a man who understood how close he'd come to losing all of this. Later, when Sophia was tucked into bed and the house settled into its nighttime rhythm, Natalie stood at the window of her room and looked out at the lights stretching toward the city. The woman reflected in the glass felt familiar at last, not untouched by loss, but no longer defined by it. Vincenzo joined her without knocking. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said gently. Natalie turned, studying him, the lines earned by responsibility, the restraint that had replaced impulse, the steadiness that had made room for her rather than enclosing it. "I already have," she said. He waited. "I'm not afraid of this life," Natalie continued. "Not because it's safe, but because it's honest." A pause. Then, quietly, "And us." She crossed the room and took his hand, anchoring the answer in something tangible. "Us is something I choose. Every day." The kiss that followed was soft and sure, no longer a question, but a shared understanding. When they parted, Vincenzo rested his forehead against hers, the intimacy unguarded. "I won't cage you," he said. "I wouldn't stay if you tried," she replied, smiling. The next morning came gently, breakfast on the terrace, Sophia's laughter carried on the breeze. Natalie moved through the day with a sense of rightness she had never known, not even in her brightest years as a dancer. This life wasn't built on recovery alone. It was built on intention. That afternoon, as Natalie reviewed lesson plans in her office, she felt the old ache in her shoulders stir, not with pain, but memory. She flexed carefully, acknowledging it without resentment. It was part of her, not a limitation, not a sentence. Vincenzo appeared at the doorway, watching her for a moment before speaking. "There's a gala next month," he said. "The foundation. Press will be there." Natalie considered, then nodded. "We'll be ready." The confidence in her voice surprised neither of them. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the estate glowed with soft light, Natalie stood between Vincenzo and Sophia, hands linked, the three of them watching the day close. There were no grand declarations, no promises that needed witnesses. Sophia leaned against Natalie's side and looked up. "This feels like home," she said. Natalie felt the word settle where it belonged. "It is." Vincenzo's hand tightened around hers, steady and warm. The past did not vanish. The scars did not fade. But they no longer dictated the future. Natalie had not returned to who she was before the bullet. She had become someone new, someone seen, someone chosen, someone who knew, with quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And this time, she wasn't surviving. She was living.